My name is Rebecca Mitchell, 32, and my mother has always had a special way of making me feel worthless. When her text appeared on my phone, "We're doing Mother's Day with just the well-behaved kids. You can skip this year," I surprised myself by smiling. After decades as the family scapegoat, watching my siblings Ashley and Brian bask in adoration while I collected scraps of attention, something inside me snapped. That message wasn't just another exclusion, it was my liberation. For the first time, I wasn't going to chase her approval. I was going to show her exactly who her problem child had become. Before I dive into how this all unfolded, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up to toxic family members. Trust me, what happened next is something you won't want to miss. Growing up in the Mitchell household meant understanding your place in the hierarchy early. Mine was firmly at the bottom, beneath my perfect siblings. Ashley, 2 years older than me, was the pristine daughter who could do no wrong with her straight-A report cards and beauty pageant trophies. Brian, 2 years younger, was the charming son who had my mother wrapped around his finger from the day he was born. And me? I was the middle child who apparently came with a factory defect: too loud, too opinionated, too much. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. If Ashley wore pink, I'd choose blue. And somehow, that was an act of rebellion. If Brian broke an expensive vase, I'd be questioned first. The pattern was so predictable, it would have been comical if it hadn't been so painful. My father, James, watched this dynamic unfold, like a passive audience member. He'd occasionally shoot me sympathetic glances when my mother's criticism became particularly harsh. But he never intervened. "That's just how your mother is," he'd whisper when he found me crying. "Try not to upset her." As if her happiness was my responsibility while my own didn't matter. One incident crystallized our family dynamic perfectly. I was 12, and Ashley, 14, had taken Mom's expensive perfume to impress her friends. When the bottle returned half empty, Ashley panicked and placed it in my room. The screaming match that followed ended with me grounded for a month despite my protests of innocence. Years later, when Ashley offhandedly mentioned her scheme during a Christmas dinner, everyone, including my mother, laughed it off as a cute childhood prank. The month I spent isolated in my room wasn't part of the funny anecdote. I threw myself into academics and extracurriculars, certain that achievement would finally earn me the approval I craved. National Honor Society, student body president, full scholarship to a prestigious university, each accomplishment was met with muted acknowledgement. Meanwhile, Brian's C+ in math warranted a celebration dinner, and Ashley's promotion to assistant manager at a retail store made the family Christmas letter. My graduation from business school with distinction received a perfunctory card. That same month, my parents threw an elaborate party when Ashley completed a 2-week certificate course. The contrast was so stark that even my relatives commented on it, though never within my mother's earshot. Family gatherings became exercises in emotional endurance. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter, I'd arrive with hope that maybe this time would be different. Instead, I'd watch my mother beam at my siblings while barely acknowledging my presence. When I did speak up about feeling excluded, the response was always the same. "You're being dramatic. You always make everything about you," or my mother's favorite, "This is why you're so difficult to be around." After years of trying to win approval through conventional means, I attempted direct confrontation. During a family dinner 3 years ago, I calmly asked why my accomplishments never seemed to merit the same recognition as my siblings. My mother's face hardened as she replied, "Perhaps if you spent less time feeling sorry for yourself and more time thinking about others, you'd be celebrated more." Ashley nodded in agreement, while Brian smirked into his wine glass. My father suddenly became very interested in his mashed potatoes. By 32, I'd built a life that should have made any parent proud. I was a marketing executive with an impressive client list, owned my condo outright, and had a circle of loyal friends. Yet, in my family's eyes, especially my mother's, I remained the difficult middle child who couldn't quite measure up. The resentment and hurt had built so gradually that I hardly noticed how it had calcified inside me until that text message arrived. So casually cruel that it finally broke through my last defenses. Something had to give, and it wasn't going to be me anymore. The text about Mother's Day exclusion wasn't actually the breaking point, it was merely the final straw after a revelation that had begun 2 months earlier. It started at my nephew's 5th birthday party. I'd stepped into the kitchen to refill my water when I overheard my mother's voice from the adjacent laundry room. I don't know why Rebecca even bothers coming to these things. It's not like she knows how to behave in a family setting. Then my sister Ashley's distinctive laugh. Did you see that outfit? She always has to make everything about her. My brother Brian chimed in. Maybe we should start having family events she's not invited to. Save us all the drama. I stood frozen, water overflowing my glass, as 32 years of suspicion crystallized into certainty. This wasn't casual venting or momentary frustration. This was a coordinated family position. I was the officially designated outsider. Rather than creating my usual scene, which apparently they were all expecting, I quietly set down my glass and left without saying goodbye. No one even noticed my absence until an hour later when my mother texted, "Typical Rebecca behavior. Your nephew is asking where you went." That night, I couldn't sleep. A lifetime of gaslighting had taught me to question my perceptions, but their words had been unmistakable. On a whim, I opened my laptop and logged into my mother's iCloud account. Years ago, she had asked me to set it up and, in typical fashion, had never bothered to change the password. I'd never used this access before, it felt invasive, but something drove me to look now. What I found shattered any remaining illusions. There was a family group chat I'd never been added to, active for over 3 years. Scrolling through the messages made me physically ill. Screenshots of my social media posts with mocking comments. Discussions about what to tell extended family members about why I wasn't at certain gatherings I'd never been invited to. Strategies for how to manage Rebecca at mandatory events. But the true betrayal went deeper than mean gossip. In a conversation from last year, my mother had shared that she and Dad had helped Ashley with the down payment on her house. In another thread, they discussed paying off Brian's student loans. This, while I had worked 3 jobs through college after being told my parents believed in self-sufficiency and couldn't help me financially. The next day, I called in sick to work and drove to my parents' neighborhood. Instead of turning into their driveway, I continued 2 blocks to the home of Mr. Donovan, my father's former business partner who had retired 5 years ago. He'd always been kind to me, and somehow I knew he might have answers. Over coffee, Mr. Donovan's face grew increasingly troubled as I described my discoveries. Finally, he sighed heavily. "Rebecca, I've respected your father's wishes to stay out of family matters, but what you're describing isn't right." He explained that the family business had been far more successful than my parents had ever let on. "Your father set up trust funds for all 3 of you children when you were born. Equal amounts." My hands began to shake. "I never received anything." "I know," he said quietly. "About 10 years ago, your mother convinced James that you were too financially irresponsible to receive your share. They redistributed most of your fund between your siblings. I opposed it, but I was outvoted. The betrayal knocked the wind from me. All those years of struggling to pay tuition, eating ramen for weeks straight, the crushing student loans I was still paying off while my siblings had been handed everything. But the revelations weren't finished. After leaving Mr. Donovan's, I met with a college friend who worked at the family company. Over drinks, she reluctantly confirmed that Brian had been embezzling from the business for years, small amounts that added up to significant sums. When accounting discrepancies were discovered, my mother had somehow implicated me, suggesting I had accessed the system remotely to cause problems. I hadn't even had the company's network credentials since an internship during college. The most personal betrayal came last. My relationship with Ryan had ended abruptly last year after 2 years together. He'd simply said we wanted different things and stopped returning my calls. I reached out to him now, asking if we could meet for closure. Over coffee, his expression was pained as he admitted the truth. "Your mother called me Rebecca. She said you had serious psychological issues your family had been covering up. She showed me childhood medical records claiming you had been diagnosed with pathological lying and manipulation tendencies." He looked away, ashamed. "She said you'd destroyed previous relationships and they were worried about what you might do to me." I was scared. I sat in stunned silence. There were no childhood diagnoses. The medical records must have been fabricated. My own mother had systematically destroyed my chance at happiness. The final confirmation came when I confronted Ashley directly. I invited her to lunch, recorded our conversation on my phone, and calmly laid out what I had discovered. I expected denials. Instead, after initial sputtering, she grew smugly defensive. "You've always been jealous of the special relationship Mom and I have," she said, sipping her wine. "Did you ever consider that maybe Mom just likes us better? That we're simply more lovable?" Her smile was cold. "You've always been the odd one out, Rebecca. That's just your role in the family. Some people are just born to be the black sheep." Walking back to my car after that lunch, something shifted inside me. The hurt and resentment that had defined my existence suddenly clarified into something harder and more focused. I was done being the family scapegoat. If they wanted to cast me in that role, they were about to discover I had talents they'd never appreciated. I wouldn't be attending their exclusive Mother's Day celebration, but I would absolutely make my presence felt. The day after my conversation with Ashley, I made an emergency appointment with my therapist, Sarah. For 3 years, she'd been helping me work through what she diplomatically called my family of origin issues. I'd always held back slightly in our sessions, afraid that fully acknowledging the dysfunction would mean losing my family completely. Now I laid everything out: the text message, the discovered group chat, Mr. Donovan's revelations, Ryan's confession, and Ashley's smug admission. Sarah listened intently, her normally calm professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine concern. "Rebecca," she said when I finished, "what you're describing goes beyond typical family dysfunction. This is systematic emotional abuse and financial exploitation." She leaned forward. "I need to ask, what do you want your relationship with your family to look like moving forward?" The question stopped me short. For my entire life, I'd been fighting for a place at the family table, desperately seeking approval that never came. But now, "I don't want a relationship with people who actively work to hurt me," I said, the realization washing over me like cold water. "I want accountability, and then I want to be free of them." Sarah and I spent the next hour discussing healthy boundaries versus revenge, the psychological impact of family scapegoating, and strategies for protecting myself emotionally in the coming weeks. As I left her office, she squeezed my hand. "Remember, healthy confrontation is about reclaiming your truth, not punishing others even when punishment seems deserved." That evening, I invited my 2 closest friends, Jennifer Torres and Michael Davis, to my apartment. These 2 had witnessed my family's treatment firsthand over the years, had dried my tears after particularly brutal holiday gatherings, had offered their homes when I couldn't face another family Christmas. "It's worse than we thought," Jennifer said after I shared the full story. A high school counselor with a keen understanding of family dynamics, she wasn't easily shocked. "This is textbook scapegoating, and they've gone to extraordinary lengths to maintain it." Michael, an IT security specialist whose own family background included an alcoholic father, nodded grimly. "This isn't just emotional games anymore, Beck. They've actively sabotaged your finances, your career, your relationships. That's crossing every line." Together, the 3 of us formed what Michael jokingly called Operation Family Reckoning. Jennifer brought research on family scapegoating and narcissistic family systems, helping me understand the psychological underpinnings of my family's behavior. Michael focused on the practical: securing my digital presence, checking my apartment for any signs of intrusion, and setting up secure communication channels. "If they've gone to these lengths already," he warned, "they might escalate when they sense you pulling away." Over the next week, I took a systematic approach to understanding the full scope of my family's deception. I hired Thomas Carter, a private investigator recommended by a colleague, to look into the family business finances and verify Mr. Donovan's claims about my trust fund. Thomas was a retired police detective with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "Financial abuse within families is more common than people realize," he told me during our initial meeting. "People underestimate what someone will do when money and status are at stake." Simultaneously, I reached out to Cassandra Wong, a forensic accountant who specialized in family business disputes. She agreed to review the company records I had legitimate access to as a nominal shareholder. While she couldn't access everything without legal authority, what she found confirmed my suspicions. There's a pattern of financial irregularities dating back at least 6 years, she explained, showing me spreadsheets highlighting suspicious transactions. Most notably, there's a series of consulting payments to shell companies that appear to be controlled by your brother. The amounts individually wouldn't raise red flags, but collectively they represent a significant sum. I also began the painful process of documenting the emotional abuse. I created a detailed timeline of incidents dating back to my earliest memories, corroborated where possible with emails, texts, and witnesses. Jennifer helped me organize this chronology, adding her own observations from events she had attended. The pattern is undeniable when you see it laid out like this, she said, looking at the completed document. No one could call this normal family disagreements. My lawyer friend, Grace Patel, reviewed everything we'd gathered. An assertive corporate attorney with a specialty in family business disputes, she didn't mince words. You have grounds for legal action regarding the misappropriation of your trust fund, she advised. But pursuing that would mean a protracted, expensive battle that would drain you emotionally. Given what you've told me about your family, they'd likely close ranks and fight dirty. She tapped her pen on the desk thoughtfully. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't a lawsuit. It's simply ensuring everyone knows the truth. In the midst of this fact-finding mission, I took steps to insulate myself professionally. I scheduled a private meeting with my CEO, giving him a carefully edited version of the situation, explaining that I was dealing with a family dispute that might result in negative calls about me from relatives. To my relief, he was supportive, assuring me that my work record spoke for itself. As Mother's Day approached, the final piece fell into place. I met with Dr. Alan Foster, my father's cardiologist, whom I'd known since my father's heart scare 3 years ago. Ethically, he couldn't share medical details, but when I explained my concerns about manipulation of my father's health information, his expression confirmed my suspicions. I can only say that your father's condition has been consistently stable, he said carefully. Any suggestion otherwise would be inaccurate. The night before Mother's Day, I reviewed everything with my support team in my living room. The evidence was laid out on my dining table. Financial records, timeline documents, recorded conversations, medical reports, and statements from witnesses. The case against my family was overwhelming. Are you sure you want to do this? Michael asked quietly. Once you start, there's no going back. I looked at the Mother's Day text on my phone one more time. We're doing Mother's Day with just the well-behaved kids. You can skip this year. I've spent my entire life trying to earn a place at a table where I was never wanted, I said. It's time they learned what happens when you consistently underestimate someone. Jennifer squeezed my hand. Just remember what Sarah said, this is about reclaiming your truth, not revenge. I nodded, though the line between the two had begun to blur. Tomorrow, they'll finally see me clearly. For better or worse. Before executing my full plan, I decided to give my family one last chance. Perhaps it was the lingering hope of the little girl who still desperately wanted her mother's approval, or maybe it was Sarah's voice in my head urging healthy confrontation before nuclear options. Whatever the reason, 3 days before Mother's Day, I invited my parents to dinner at a neutral location, an upscale restaurant where the public setting might encourage civility. To my surprise, they accepted. My mother's text response was characteristically backhanded. We're glad you're finally ready to discuss your behavior. I arrived early, selecting a quiet corner table and ordering a glass of wine to steady my nerves. When my parents entered the restaurant, the contrast between them was striking. My father looked diminished somehow, his shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. My mother, however, was immaculate as always, her posture perfect, her designer outfit carefully selected, her smile practiced and cold. Rebecca, she said, air-kissing near my cheek without making contact. You look healthy. My father gave me an awkward side hug. Good to see you, kiddo, he mumbled, using the childhood nickname that had once made me feel special. Once seated, my mother took control of the conversation immediately, ordering for both herself and my father without consulting him. She spent the first 15 minutes discussing Ashley's children and Brian's recent promotion, carefully emphasizing family events I hadn't been invited to. When our appetizers arrived, I gently steered the conversation toward the purpose of our dinner. Mom, Dad, I wanted to talk about our family dynamic and how it's affected me. My mother's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. Always so dramatic, Rebecca. This is exactly the behavior we're concerned about. Please just listen, I said, maintaining my calm. For years, I've felt excluded and treated differently from Ashley and Brian. The recent text about Mother's Day is just one example. If you'd behave appropriately, you wouldn't be excluded. My mother replied smoothly. Your siblings understand family loyalty. I took a deep breath. I've discovered some things that concern me deeply. For instance, I know about the trust fund that was reallocated to Ashley and Brian. My father's head snapped up, his face paling. My mother's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened around her water glass. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Mr. Donovan explained everything, I continued. And I know about the financial help you've given Ashley and Brian while telling me you couldn't help with my student loans. Harold Donovan should mind his own business, my mother hissed, dropping her pleasant facade momentarily. Family finances are private matters. They are when they're fair, I countered. I also know about Brian's embezzlement from the company, and how you suggested I was responsible for the accounting discrepancies. My father finally spoke, his voice barely audible. We were trying to protect the family reputation. By sacrificing me? I asked him directly. What about protecting your daughter? You've always been able to take care of yourself. My mother interjected. You're stronger than your siblings. That's not strength, Mom. That's survival after being thrown into the deep end repeatedly while you held out life preservers to Ashley and Brian. The conversation deteriorated quickly from there. My mother's defense mechanisms kicked into high gear. Denial, deflection, and when those didn't work, direct attack. You've always been jealous of your siblings, she said, voice rising enough that nearby diners glanced our way. This is exactly the kind of attention-seeking behavior that makes family gatherings so difficult. You turn everything into a drama about you. This isn't about attention, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. It's about years of unequal treatment. Perhaps if you'd been a more lovable child, things would have been different, my mother replied, the cruelty of her words hanging in the air between us. My father flinched but said nothing. The final blow came when I mentioned Ryan and what my mother had done. For a moment, genuine confusion crossed my father's face. He clearly hadn't been aware of this particular manipulation. My mother, however, didn't deny it. I was protecting him, she said. Your relationships always end badly. Remember David in college? Or Jennifer? They ended badly because you interfered, I said, the realization hitting me as I spoke. You've sabotaged every significant relationship I've had. Don't be ridiculous, she scoffed. You're simply not good at maintaining relationships. It's one of your many flaws. I looked at my father, hoping for some support, some acknowledgement. He met my eyes briefly, then looked away. Your mother has always wanted what's best for the family, he said weakly. It was at that moment I knew with absolute certainty that reconciliation was impossible. My mother would never acknowledge the damage she'd done, and my father would never stand up to her. I had hoped we could find a way forward, I said quietly. But that would require honesty and accountability. What it would require is you accepting your place in this family, my mother countered. Which has always been your problem, Rebecca. You've never known your place. Those words, so revealing in their naked desire for control, crystallized everything for me. My mother didn't want a daughter. She wanted a subordinate who would accept mistreatment without question. You're right about one thing, I said, placing my napkin on the table and standing up. I never have known my place in this family, because you never allowed me to have one. But I know my worth now, and it's far greater than how you valued me. My mother's face contorted with rage. This is why you're not invited to Mother's Day. This self-pitying martyrdom. Maybe you weren't meant to be part of this family. Those words, maybe you weren't meant to be part of this family, should have devastated me. Instead, they felt like release. I looked at both my parents calmly. That's the first honest thing you've said tonight. Goodbye. I walked out of the restaurant with my head high, though my legs felt unsteady. In my car, the tears finally came, not for what I was losing, but for what I had never had. A mother who cherished me. A father who protected me. a family where I belonged. As I drove home through blurred vision, I made my final decision. The reconciliation attempt had failed, but it had confirmed what I needed to know. There would be no more olive branches, no more desperate attempts to earn love that had been withheld for reasons that had nothing to do with me. Mother's Day would proceed as planned without me at their table, but very much with my presence felt. They had defined me as the problem child for 32 years. It was time to show them exactly what that problem could do. The morning after the failed dinner with my parents, I woke with a strange sense of peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the weight of seeking their approval. That freedom allowed me to focus clearly on what needed to be done. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas, the private investigator. Documents confirmed. Meeting set for today at 2 p.m. Thomas had arranged a confidential meeting with 2 board members of the family company who weren't directly related to us. He had compiled evidence of Brian's embezzlement in a format that couldn't be ignored: meticulous bank records showing the flow of company funds into shell corporations and eventually into my brother's personal accounts. These irregularities represent a significant liability for the company, Thomas explained to the board members as I sat silently beside him. As minority shareholders, you have fiduciary responsibilities that could be compromised if this information became public. The 2 men, longtime business associates of my father, looked grave. Why bring this to us, and not directly to James? One asked. Because James Mitchell is aware of the situation and has chosen to conceal it, I said, finding my voice. As his daughter and a nominal shareholder, I felt obligated to inform other board members who might be held legally liable. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to alarm as Thomas walked them through the evidence. By the end of the hour-long presentation, they were asking pointed questions about how long the embezzlement had been occurring and what other financial irregularities might exist. We'll need to call an emergency board meeting, the senior board member said finally. This requires immediate attention. I understand, I replied. I only ask that the meeting be scheduled for the day after Mother's Day. There are family matters I need to address first. They agreed, and as we left, Thomas gave my shoulder a supportive squeeze. Phase 1 complete, he murmured. My next stop was more painful. I'd arranged to meet with my father's doctor, not in his professional capacity, but as someone who could verify certain facts. We met at a coffee shop near the hospital where he worked. I want to be clear, Dr. Foster said immediately. I cannot and will not violate doctor-patient confidentiality. I understand and respect that, I assured him. I'm not asking for medical details. I just need confirmation about something my mother has told the family. I explained how my mother had repeatedly claimed my father's heart condition was far more serious than it was, using his fragile health as a way to control family decisions and prevent confrontations. Has my father's condition been presented to you as a reason why certain family matters shouldn't be discussed with him? I asked carefully. Dr. Foster sipped his coffee, choosing his words with obvious care. Without discussing specific medical information, I can say that I have never advised that your father be protected from normal family interactions or discussions. Any suggestion that stress from typical family matters would pose a significant health risk would be an overstatement of medical advice I have provided. It was exactly what I needed: confirmation that my mother had weaponized my father's health as another control tactic. I thanked the doctor and left, checking another item off my preparation list. The most challenging part of my plan involved reaching out to extended family members. My mother had carefully curated her image as the devoted matriarch, and I knew challenging that narrative would meet resistance. I started with my mother's sister, my Aunt Patricia, who had occasionally shown me kindness when I was younger. We met for lunch in a quiet cafe, and I began cautiously, sharing some of the milder examples of the family dynamic before gradually introducing the more serious evidence. To my surprise, Aunt Patricia nodded with increasing certainty as I spoke. I've wondered for years, she admitted. The way Diane talks about you compared to Ashley and Brian, it never seemed right. And your father's passivity, it's so different from the James I knew growing up. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. I should have said something sooner, Rebecca. I saw it, but I didn't want to interfere. Her validation was unexpectedly emotional for me. You believe me? I asked, my voice catching. Of course I do, she said firmly. And I'm not the only one who's noticed. Your grandmother, my mother, used to worry about how you were treated. She just didn't know how to address it without making things worse for you. This revelation led to connections with other extended family members, cousins, who had witnessed my mother's differential treatment at family gatherings. An uncle who had questioned why I was excluded from certain events. Each conversation added another piece to the mosaic of support I was building. My most strategic preparation involved the centerpiece of my Mother's Day plan. I commissioned a custom-made leather-bound photo album from a high-end stationery company. Inside, I carefully curated a chronological display of evidence photos of family events I'd been excluded from, alongside screenshots of the invitations sent to everyone but me. Side-by-side comparisons of lavish gifts given to my siblings versus the token presents I received. Transcripts of particularly cruel text messages and emails. Each page was meticulously captioned with dates and context, creating an undeniable visual history of the systematic favoritism and exclusion. The final pages contained copies of the financial documents showing the trust fund manipulation and evidence of the lies told about my father's health. The album was beautiful, bound in cream leather with family memories embossed in elegant gold script on the cover. I arranged for it to be delivered to my parents' home during their Mother's Day celebration, timed to arrive when all guests would be present. The day before Mother's Day, I had my final preparation session with Sarah. I'd been meeting with her twice weekly as I implemented my plan, using our sessions to ensure I was proceeding from a place of health rather than vindictive rage. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" she asked. "Nervous," I admitted, but also certain. For the first time, I'm not approaching my family from a position of need or weakness. "That's significant progress," she noted. "What are your expectations for the outcome?" I considered the question carefully. I don't expect my mother to suddenly become the parent I've always wanted. I don't even expect an apology. What I want is for the truth to be acknowledged not just by them, but by everyone who's been part of this dynamic. I want the gaslighting to end. "And after tomorrow?" Sarah asked. "What then?" "That depends on their response," I said. "I'm prepared for a range of possibilities, from total rejection to, well, I don't know what the best case scenario would be. Accountability, maybe. And you're taking care of yourself through all this?" Her concern was evident. I nodded. "Jennifer is staying with me tonight and tomorrow. Michael has arranged for security cameras at my apartment just in case. And I've taken next week off work to process whatever happens." Sarah seemed satisfied with my preparations. As our session ended, she offered one final piece of advice. "Remember that no matter what happens tomorrow, your worth isn't determined by their recognition of it. It never was." That evening, I followed through with my self-care plan. Jennifer came over with comfort food and ridiculous comedies. We avoided talking about the next day, focusing instead on creating a bubble of normalcy. Before going to bed, I checked my phone to find messages of support from everyone who had become part of my Truth Coalition: Thomas, Cassandra, Grace, Aunt Patricia, and several cousins. I fell asleep with the strange realization that in working to free myself from my toxic family, I had created a stronger support network than I'd ever had before. Whatever happened the next day, I would not face it alone. Mother's Day dawned bright and clear. I woke early, did my meditation practice, and prepared for what would likely be one of the most significant days of my life. As I sipped my coffee on my balcony, I watched families in the park across the street, mothers and children enjoying the beautiful spring morning. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully feel the grief of never having experienced that kind of maternal love. The sadness washed through me, but it didn't drown me. I had built my own life raft of truth and self-worth. My phone pinged with a notification from the delivery service. The album had been dispatched. There was no turning back now. "Ready?" Jennifer asked, joining me on the balcony. "As I'll ever be," I replied, taking one last look at the mothers and children in the park before turning away. It was time to face my own family truth. Mother's Day morning unfolded, according to Mitchell family tradition, a pattern I knew intimately despite my frequent exclusion. My mother would be preparing to receive her guests for the annual Mother's Day brunch. an elaborate affair she used to showcase her perfect family and impeccable hosting skills. Ashley and her husband would arrive first with their children, followed by Brian and his girlfriend. Various aunts, uncles, and family friends would trickle in until the house was filled with around 20 people, all there to celebrate the matriarch. I began my day with deliberate self-care. I dressed in a tailored navy suit that projected professional confidence rather than family celebration armor, not festivity. Jennifer helped me style my hair and apply subtle makeup, her ongoing commentary about reality TV shows keeping the mood light, despite the tension thrumming through my body. "Remember," she said as she finished, "no matter what happens today, you're coming home to people who see and value the real you." At precisely 11:30 a.m., when brunch would be in full swing, my phone pinged with a delivery confirmation. The photo album had arrived at my parents' home. I imagined the confused look on my mother's face as she opened an unexpected gift, the murmurs of guests as she unwrapped the elegant package. 30 minutes later, enough time for the initial pages to be viewed, I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home. Several cars lined the street, confirming that the gathering was well attended. I sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, gathering my resolve. "You've got this," I whispered to myself, channeling Sarah's steady voice in my head. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. The front door was unlocked, as it always was during gatherings, my mother's way of maintaining the illusion of welcome while controlling exactly who received invitations. I entered quietly, the sound of raised voices from the living room confirming that my gift had achieved its initial purpose. I paused in the entryway, taking in the familiar scent of my mother's signature spring flowers and breakfast casserole. Photos lined the hall, carefully curated family moments that told a story of perfect harmony. I noticed now how many featured only Ashley and Brian, or showed me at a distance from the rest of the family, physically separated even in staged photographs. When I stepped into the living room, the conversation halted abruptly. My mother stood in the center of the room, the open album in her hands, her face flushed with what appeared to be a combination of rage and fear. Ashley sat rigid on the sofa, her husband looking uncomfortably at the floor. Brian leaned against the fireplace, his expression calculating. My father sat alone in his armchair, looking somehow smaller than I remembered from just days before. "Rebecca," my mother said, her voice tight, "what is the meaning of this? This fabrication?" Around the room, relatives and family friends shifted uncomfortably. Aunt Patricia caught my eye and gave me a slight nod of encouragement. "It's not a fabrication," I said calmly. "It's a family history, just not the version you've chosen to display on your walls." "This is outrageous," Ashley burst out. "Coming here uninvited, sending this pack of lies, it's exactly the kind of attention-seeking behavior we've always had to deal with." I turned to address the room rather than engaging directly with Ashley. "I understand this is uncomfortable for everyone. I didn't come to disrupt a celebration. I came because after 32 years, the truth deserves a voice." I moved to the center of the room, beside my mother, but not addressing her directly. For those of you who've only heard one version of our family story, I'd like to offer some additional context. From my handbag, I withdrew a slim folder containing key documents, copies of what was already in the album, but organized for clear presentation. As calmly as if I were giving a business presentation, I began walking the assembled guests through the evidence. "These are records of the trust fund my parents established for all 3 of their children," I explained, handing copies to several guests. "And these are the documents showing how mine was redistributed to my siblings without my knowledge." Murmurs rippled through the room. My mother attempted to interrupt, but my father surprisingly raised his hand to stop her. His face had taken on an ashen quality. I continued methodically. "This section contains evidence of financial assistance provided to both Ashley and Brian house down payments, student loan repayments, and regular subsidies, while I was told the family couldn't help with my education." Brian pushed away from the fireplace, his face darkening. "You have no right to share private financial matters with outsiders." "These outsiders are the same family members who have been told for years that I'm irresponsible, difficult, and undeserving," I replied evenly. "They deserve to know that narrative was deliberately constructed." I turned to a new page in my presentation. This section contains documentation of Brian's systematic embezzlement from the family company, which my parents have been covering up by suggesting I was responsible for accounting discrepancies. I looked directly at my brother. The board has been informed. There's an emergency meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Brian's face drained of color. "You vindictive bitch," he hissed. "Brian," my father finally spoke. His voice sharp. I moved to the most personal betrayals. Many of you have wondered why I've had trouble maintaining relationships. These are communications showing how my mother actively sabotaged several of my serious relationships by sharing false information about my mental health and character. At this, several guests gasped audibly. My mother's best friend of 30 years set down her mimosa and stood up. "Diane, is this true?" My mother's composure finally cracked. "She's always been troubled. I was protecting those young men from what we've had to endure." The naked hostility in her voice silenced the room. In that moment, the carefully constructed facade of maternal concern fell away, revealing the truth I'd always sensed but could never prove. I turned to my father. "Dad, would you like to explain why Mom has been telling everyone your heart condition is far more serious than it is? How she's used your fragile health to control family decisions and prevent uncomfortable conversations?" My father looked up, something shifting in his expression. For the first time I could remember, he looked directly at my mother with what appeared to be dawning recognition. "That's enough," my mother snapped. "This is my home, my day, and I will not allow you to turn it into a circus for your delusions." "They're not delusions, Diane." The new voice belonged to Aunt Patricia, who had risen from her seat. "I've watched this dynamic for years and said nothing, to my shame. Rebecca has always been treated differently. Excluded. Diminished." Another voice joined in my cousin Sophia. "It's true. We've all seen it, but never spoke up. At every family gathering, Rebecca is either absent or treated like an afterthought." One by one, relatives and even some friends began to acknowledge what they had witnessed over the years. The dam of silence had broken. Ashley retreated to a corner, clutching her husband's arm, her face a mask of confusion and anger. Brian had disappeared. I later learned he'd slipped out the back door. My mother stood rigid, her knuckles white around the photo album, as the truth she'd worked so hard to suppress filled her carefully decorated living room. My father finally stood, unsteady but determined. He crossed to where I stood and, to my utter shock, took my hand. "I have failed you," he said quietly. "I saw what was happening and did nothing. I convinced myself it wasn't as bad as it seemed, that you were strong enough to handle it." His voice broke. I was a coward. The room fell silent. This was a script deviation no one had anticipated, least of all my mother, whose expression shifted rapidly between rage and calculation. "James, your heart," she began, "is fine," he cut her off. "As you well know." It was the most direct contradiction of my mother I had ever witnessed from my father. The power dynamic visibly shifted in that moment, like tectonic plates realigning. I squeezed my father's hand once, then gently released it. This wasn't about forming new alliances or choosing sides. It was about truth finally being spoken aloud. I didn't come here seeking apologies or trying to turn anyone against each other. I said to the room at large, "I came because secrets and lies have shaped our family for too long, and the only way forward, whatever that looks like, has to begin with honesty." I turned to my mother, meeting her gaze directly. "You told me I could skip Mother's Day this year because only the well-behaved children were welcome. I've spent my life trying to be good enough by your impossible and constantly shifting standards. I'm done with that now." I picked up the photo album from where she had set it down and closed it gently. This isn't a complete family history, it's just the beginning of the truth being spoken. What happens next is up to each of you. With that, I walked calmly toward the door. No dramatic exit, no final accusations, just the quiet dignity of someone who had finally reclaimed her narrative. Behind me, the murmur of voices rose as family members began speaking openly about what they had witnessed over the years. My mother's voice cut through, still attempting to regain control, but it sounded different now, desperate rather than authoritative. As I stepped outside into the spring sunshine, I felt lighter than I had in years. The truth had finally been spoken, the gaslighting exposed. Whatever came next, I would face it standing firmly in my own reality, no longer contorted to fit into a role that was never meant for me. I made it halfway down the front walk before I heard the door slam open behind me. My mother's voice, stripped of its usual careful modulation, rang out harsh and raw. "How dare you?" she shouted. "How dare you come into my home on Mother's Day and humiliate me in front of everyone?" I turned slowly to face her. Her perfect makeup couldn't disguise the mottled red of her face. Her carefully styled hair, now disheveled as she gestured wildly. For the first time in my memory, my mother had completely lost control of her public image, the facade she valued above all else. "I didn't humiliate you," I replied calmly. "I simply showed everyone the truth you've worked so hard to hide." "Truth?" She spat the word. "Your version of events, your petty grievances blown out of proportion because you've never been able to accept that your siblings simply worked harder to earn their place in this family." Several guests had followed her onto the porch, including Aunt Patricia and my father. They watched the confrontation unfold with varying expressions of shock and discomfort. "Nothing was earned, Mom," I said. "That's the point. Ashley and Brian were given everything: love, support, financial help, the benefit of the doubt. I was given conditions and criticism, and when I met those conditions, the goalposts moved." As if summoned by her name, Ashley appeared in the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed but her chin lifted in defiance. "You've always been jealous of me," she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Always trying to compete, always making yourself the victim." "I've never been your competition, Ashley," I said, feeling a surprising wave of compassion for my sister. "I've been your scapegoat. Mom needed someone to be the problem child so the rest of you could be perfect. It was never about who we actually were." Something flickered in Ashley's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps even the first glimmer of recognition. Before she could respond, guests began streaming out of the house, some heading directly to their cars, others lingering in awkward clusters on the lawn. "Now see what you've done," my mother hissed. "You've ruined everything, Diane." My father's voice, stronger than I'd heard it in years, cut through her accusations. "That's enough." She whirled on him. "Don't you start. After all I've done to protect this family's image, to make sure everyone sees us as we should be." "As we should be?" he interrupted. "Or as you want us to be? There's a difference, Diane. One I've ignored for far too long." Their gazes locked in a silent battle of wills, one that had perhaps been brewing for decades beneath the surface of their marriage. For once, my father didn't look away first. More guests were leaving now, the Mother's Day celebration thoroughly derailed. Among them, I noticed Brian being led to a car by his girlfriend, his face pale and set in rigid lines. He didn't look in my direction. Aunt Patricia approached me, putting a steadying hand on my arm. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. "I'm okay," I assured her, surprised to find it was true. Despite the chaos unfolding around me, I felt strangely centered. "Thank you for speaking up in there. I should have done it years ago," she said, regret evident in her voice. "We all should have." My cousin Sophia joined us, keys in hand. "That was the most intense family gathering since Grandma caught Grandpa with the neighbor in '85, she whispered, attempting levity. Then, more seriously, "I've got your back, Rebecca. Whatever happens next." The support was unexpected and deeply moving. For years, I'd assumed the extended family accepted my mother's narrative about me. Discovering allies among them felt like finding solid ground after years of quicksand. The confrontation between my parents had moved back inside, their raised voices audible even from the driveway. Ashley stood alone on the porch now, watching me with an unreadable expression. After a moment's hesitation, I walked back toward her. "I never wanted this to destroy the family," I said quietly. "I just couldn't live with the lies anymore." Ashley's perfect composure cracked, just slightly. "Some of what you said in there. About Mom manipulating situations." She paused, seeming to struggle with a difficult realization. "She's done that to me too. Not the same way, but," she stopped abruptly. "I need time to think about all this." It wasn't an apology, or even a full acknowledgement, but it was the first genuine exchange we'd had in years. I nodded, understanding her need to process. As I turned to leave again, I heard a crash from inside the house, followed by more shouting. The perfect Mitchell family home that had projected such flawless harmony to the outside world was literally and figuratively falling apart. I drove home in a state of emotional numbness, the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation beginning to ebb. Jennifer was waiting at my apartment with Grace and Michael, my support team assembled to help me process whatever transpired. "So?" Jennifer asked anxiously as I walked in. "What happened?" I sank onto my couch, suddenly exhausted. "Everything and nothing," I said. "The truth is out. What happens next is anyone's guess." The next 24 hours brought a flurry of developments. The emergency board meeting regarding Brian's financial misconduct proceeded as scheduled. By evening, I received a call from Thomas informing me that Brian had been removed from his position and legal action was being considered. "Your father made no attempt to defend him," Thomas said, sounding surprised. In fact, he was the one who moved for immediate dismissal. My phone alternated between exploding with messages and falling ominously silent. Extended family members reached out, some offering support, others expressing shock or disapproval at my methods. Sophia kept me updated on family gossip apparently. My mother had retreated to her bedroom and refused to speak to anyone, while my father had temporarily moved into the guest room. Ashley's reaction was the most surprising. She texted me the following evening. "I've been thinking about what you said. Some of it rings true. I've been looking back at things differently. Can we talk sometime? Not now, but eventually." The message wasn't exactly warm, but it represented a crack in the united front my siblings had always presented against me. My mother, predictably, escalated her attacks. She began calling mutual acquaintances, family, friends, even my workplace, painting me as mentally unstable and vindictive. Thanks to my earlier preparation with my CEO, these attempts gained little traction. Still, the desperation behind them was telling her control was slipping, and she was grasping at any means to regain it. The most disturbing development came 3 days after Mother's Day when she showed up unannounced at my apartment building. Security called to inform me she was in the lobby, demanding to see me. "She seems quite agitated," the security guard said diplomatically. "Should I have her escorted out?" Part of me wanted to avoid another confrontation, but I knew this moment was inevitable. "I'll come down," I said. My mother paced the lobby like a caged animal, her appearance shockingly disheveled by her standards. When she saw me, she straightened, some of her habitual composure returning. "Rebecca," she said, her voice arctic, "I hope you're satisfied with the destruction you've caused." "I didn't come to your home looking for destruction," I replied. "I came looking for acknowledgement of the truth." "Your truth," she corrected. "Your skewed, self-pitying version of events. The financial records aren't subjective, Mom. Neither are the recorded conversations or the testimonies from family members." Her expression hardened further. "You've turned everyone against me, your father, the family, even Ashley is suddenly questioning things. After everything I've done, all the sacrifices I've made to build this family." "What sacrifices?" I asked quietly. "What did you ever give up for me?" She had no answer to that, which was an answer in itself. "I want you to retract everything," she said. "Tell everyone you exaggerated, that you misunderstood family dynamics because of your issues." The pause before issues was heavy with implication. "I won't do that," I said simply. "Then you're no longer my daughter," she declared, as if pronouncing a devastating sentence. "You're dead to this family." The words should have crushed me. For most of my life, they would have. Instead, I felt an odd sense of finality, like a book closing on a chapter that had been painfully extended. "I haven't been your daughter in any meaningful way for a very long time," I said. "Maybe I never was. The difference now is that I've stopped trying to earn a place that was never going to be given to me." She stared at me, seeming genuinely bewildered by my calm acceptance of her ultimate threat. Without another word, she turned and left, her heels clicking sharply across the marble floor of the lobby. As I watched her go, I realized I was witnessing the end of not just my relationship with her, but the collapse of the family structure as it had existed my entire life. The carefully constructed hierarchy, the assigned roles, the unspoken rules, all of it was crumbling in the face of exposed truth. What would rise from those ruins remained to be seen. But for the first time, I faced that uncertainty without fear. Whatever came next, it would be built on honesty rather than illusion, and I would face it as my authentic self, no longer the family scapegoat, just Rebecca, finally free to write her own story. In the weeks following the Mother's Day confrontation, the shockwaves continued to reverberate through the extended Mitchell family network. The carefully maintained image of family perfection my mother had cultivated for decades had shattered, and in its place, a more honest if messier reality was taking shape. Brian's situation deteriorated rapidly. The board's investigation uncovered even more financial irregularities than initially suspected. 2 weeks after being removed from the company, he was informed that criminal charges were being considered. In a panic, he called me. "You have to help me," he said, his voice barely recognizable through its strain. "Tell them you exaggerated, that it was a misunderstanding." "I can't do that, Brian," I replied. "The evidence speaks for itself. Do you know what this will do to me? To my life?" The desperate edge in his voice almost elicited my sympathy. "Almost. I know exactly what it's like to have your life derailed by other people's actions," I said quietly. "The difference is, you actually did what you're being accused of." He hung up without another word. Later that day, I learned from my father that Brian had agreed to make full restitution to avoid prosecution. His girlfriend had broken off their relationship, and he had moved temporarily to a cousin's vacation home in Michigan to regroup. My father had called me directly, a rare occurrence that still felt strange. Our conversations were tentative, laden with the weight of decades of his passive complicity. But they were happening. He had moved out of the family home into a small apartment, a separation he described as necessary for clarity. "I've been a coward," he said during one of our calls. "I told myself I was keeping the peace, but really, I was just avoiding conflict at any cost, even when that cost was your well-being." "Why?" I asked simply. It was the question I'd wanted to ask my entire life. He was silent for a long moment. "Your mother has a way of rewriting reality. At first, I could see it happening, but over time, it became easier to accept her version than to challenge it. I convinced myself her perspective was valid, that you were resilient enough to handle the imbalance." He sighed heavily. "I failed you, Rebecca. I can't change that, but I want you to know I see it now. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, to make up for a lifetime of standing by while I was scapegoated, but it was a beginning. I wasn't ready to forgive him, but I was willing to listen." Ashley's evolution proved the most surprising. 2 weeks after Mother's Day, she asked to meet for coffee. She arrived looking unusually subdued, her typically perfect appearance slightly disheveled in a way that spoke of interrupted sleep and inner turmoil. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began awkwardly. "Looking back at things. Remembering incidents differently." She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "That perfume incident when we were kids. I never thought about how unfair that was to you. How many times things like that happened." It wasn't quite an apology, but the admission itself was significant. "Mom always made it so clear who the good daughter was," she continued. I think I was afraid of losing that position, of becoming like you, the one she was always disappointed in." "It was never about us, Ashley," I said gently. "Her need to categorize us that way came from something broken in her, not in either of us." Ashley nodded slowly. "Since everything happened, she's been different with me, colder, like I've failed her by even questioning things." Her eyes met mine. "Is that how it always felt for you?" The question pierced me. "Yes," I said simply. "That's exactly how it felt." Something shifted between us in that moment, a new understanding born of shared experience, even if that experience came from different positions in the family hierarchy. We weren't suddenly best friends, but a tentative bridge had formed where there had only been a chasm before. Meanwhile, my extended family was undergoing its own reckoning. Aunt Patricia had become my most vocal supporter, openly challenging my mother's version of events and encouraging other family members to acknowledge what they had witnessed over the years. "I've enabled Diane's behavior for decades," she told me during one of our now regular lunch dates. We all did, in different ways. It was easier to go along with her narrative than confront the uncomfortable truth. My cousin Sophia organized a family dinner, notably excluding my mother, where several relatives approached me with their own recollections of witnessing my unequal treatment. "Remember when you won that national essay contest in high school?" my cousin Mark asked. Aunt Diane barely mentioned it, but when Ashley won her regional swim meet the same year, she talked about it for months. Even as teenagers, we noticed the difference. These validations, these confirmations that I hadn't imagined or exaggerated the disparity, were profoundly healing. For years, I'd questioned my own perceptions, wondered if I was indeed overly sensitive or seeking attention as my mother claimed. Having others confirm what I had experienced helped solidify my sense of reality. Perhaps the most unexpected alliance came from Katherine Johnson, my mother's oldest friend. She called me a month after Mother's Day, asking if we could meet. "I've known your mother since college," she said when we sat down together. "I've watched her parent all three of you from the beginning." She looked down at her hands, then back up at me with clear eyes. "What you said that day about the unequal treatment, about being scapegoated, I've seen it all. For years, I tried to gently point it out to her, but she always had a rational explanation that made me doubt what I was seeing." Katherine reached into her purse and pulled out a small photo. "This was taken at your high school graduation. Do you remember?" I took the photo, studying it. There I was in my cap and gown, standing slightly apart from my family. My mother's body was angled toward Ashley, who hadn't even been graduating. "I took this picture," Katherine said, "and even then, I noticed how your mother physically positioned herself away from you on what should have been your day. It was so consistent that it couldn't be coincidence." She sighed deeply. "I should have been braver, spoken up more clearly. I'm sorry I didn't." Her acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you for telling me now," I managed. These new connections and rekindled relationships formed a support network I had never experienced before. For the first time, I wasn't the isolated scapegoat fighting alone against a united family narrative. I had allies, witnesses, people willing to stand beside me in acknowledging the truth. My professional life flourished in this new environment, free from the subtle sabotage my mother had engaged in. I was offered a promotion that would have previously been undermined by concerned calls about my stability or commitment. Friends remarked on a new confidence in my demeanor, a straightforwardness that came from no longer second-guessing my every perception. My mother, meanwhile, retreated from family gatherings as her control diminished. The few reports I received suggested she was focusing on rebuilding her social standing outside the family, crafting a new narrative in which she was the victim of an ungrateful daughter's vendetta. Some people believed her. Of course, those who hadn't witnessed the family dynamics firsthand, or who benefited from maintaining a relationship with her. I found I didn't care as much as I would have expected. The opinions of people willing to accept her version without question no longer seemed important. I had spent too many years trying to correct misconceptions about myself. Now I was content to let my actions and character speak for themselves. 6 months after Mother's Day, I received a letter from my father's attorney. My portion of the original trust fund was being restored with interest. The accompanying note from my father was brief but significant. "This doesn't make up for the past, but it's a start toward making things right." The money itself meant less to me than the acknowledgement it represented, concrete proof that I had been wronged, that my perception of inequity had been accurate all along. I decided to use part of it to establish a scholarship for students who had overcome family adversity, transforming the symbol of my exclusion into an opportunity for others who had faced similar struggles. As the year anniversary of the confrontation approached, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. The family I had desperately sought acceptance from had been reconfigured entirely. Some relationships were severed, perhaps permanently. Others were being cautiously rebuilt on more honest foundations. New connections had formed, where none had existed before. It wasn't the happy ending of family reconciliation I might once have hoped for. My mother remained unwilling to acknowledge any wrongdoing, maintaining that I had distorted events to paint her as a villain. But I had stopped expecting or needing her to validate my experience. The truth had been spoken, witnessed, and accepted by enough people that her denial no longer had the power to make me doubt myself. In place of the family I had been born into, I was building something new, a chosen family of friends and relatives who saw me clearly and valued me for who I actually was, not for how well I performed an assigned role. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And after a lifetime of chasing illusions, reality, however complicated, felt like the greatest gift of all. 1 year to the day after the Mother's Day confrontation, I hosted a gathering at my apartment. It wasn't a celebration of the anniversary that would have been macabre, but rather a conscious creation of something new. I called it a chosen family dinner, and the guest list reflected the reshaping of my personal connections over the past 12 months. Jennifer and Michael were there, of course, my steadfast supporters through the entire ordeal. Aunt Patricia came, bringing her signature apple pie and a warm hug. My father attended, still somewhat awkward in this new territory, where he was neither patriarch nor passive bystander, but trying earnestly to find his place. Sophia and 3 other cousins joined, along with Katherine Johnson, whose friendship had become surprisingly important to me. Ashley came alone, without her husband, who remained firmly in my mother's camp. Her presence was significant. 6 months earlier, she wouldn't have risked our mother's displeasure by attending an event I hosted. Brian was notably absent. After avoiding prosecution by making financial restitution, he had moved to Chicago to start fresh, maintaining minimal contact with everyone from his previous life. And there were new faces, friends, and colleagues who had become more important as I opened myself to authentic connections. Jason Williams, a graphic designer I had been dating for 2 months, helped me arrange chairs and pour wine. His easy smile and straightforward nature, a refreshing change from the complex psychological maneuvering that had characterized my family interactions. As we gathered around my dining table, expanded with borrowed folding tables to accommodate everyone, I looked at the eclectic mix of people and felt a profound sense of peace. This was messy, imperfect, and real people who chose to be together, not bound by obligation or controlled by manipulation. "I'd like to say something," I said, raising my glass once everyone was seated. A year ago, I thought I was fighting to claim my place in my family of origin. What I've discovered since then is that family isn't just about blood or history. It's about truth, respect, and choice. I looked around the table. Each of you has chosen to be part of my journey, to see me as I am rather than as someone needed me to be. That's what we're celebrating tonight. The dinner that followed was nothing like the rigidly controlled gatherings of my childhood. Conversations flowed naturally, occasionally becoming heated when topics turned political, sometimes dissolving into laughter over shared memories or inside jokes. No one was performing a role or walking on eggshells, afraid of triggering disapproval. After dessert, my father asked if we could speak privately. We stepped onto my small balcony, the spring evening air carrying the scent of blooming flowers from the park across the street. "I've been seeing a therapist," he said without preamble, trying to understand how I allowed things to happen the way they did. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I married your mother because she was dynamic, decisive, everything I wasn't. I admired how she always knew exactly what she wanted." He sighed. "Over time, I realized those qualities had a darker side. But by then, our roles were set. I told myself I was keeping the peace by not challenging her, but really, I was protecting myself from conflict at your expense." The admission hung between us, honest in a way our relationship had never been. "I can't change the past," he continued, "but I'm working on being different now. More present, more willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable." He looked at me directly. "I don't expect forgiveness, Rebecca. But I hope, with time, we might build something new." "I'd like that," I said, surprised to find I meant it. The anger I had carried toward him hadn't disappeared, but it had evolved into something more complex, a sadness for what could have been, tempered by cautious hope for what might still develop. When we rejoined the gathering, I found Ashley in quiet conversation with Katherine, their heads bent together in what appeared to be an intense discussion. Later, Ashley pulled me aside. "Katherine was telling me about times Mom undermined me that I never knew about," she said, her expression troubled. "Apparently, she called Jason my college boyfriend and told him I had fertility issues that would make me a complicated choice for a serious relationship." She shook her head in disbelief. "We broke up 2 weeks later," He said he wasn't ready for anything serious, but now I wonder. The revelation didn't surprise me, but Ashley's willingness to acknowledge it represented significant growth. Mom's need for control extended to all of us, I said gently. We just experienced it differently. I've been so angry, Ashley admitted. At Mom for manipulating us against each other. At Dad for letting it happen. At myself for being so easily controlled. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. Even at you, for disrupting the system I'd learned to navigate successfully. But mostly at myself for not seeing the truth sooner. We were all doing what we needed to survive the dynamics we were born into, I said. Even Mom, in her way. Ashley looked surprised at my mention of our mother. Have you heard from her? I shook my head. Not directly. I know she's still in town, still maintaining her social circle. I hear she tells people I had some kind of breakdown. She tells everyone who will listen that you fabricated everything for attention, Ashley confirmed. Some people believe her. Others have questions they didn't use to ask. The fact that some were questioning my mother's narrative represented a seismic shift in her carefully controlled world. For decades, her version of reality had been accepted without challenge by almost everyone in her orbit. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, each with warm hugs and promises to get together soon, I found myself sitting on my couch beside Jason, contentedly exhausted. That was beautiful, he said, taking my hand. Thank you for letting me be part of it. His simple appreciation struck me forcefully. Throughout my life, I had been conditioned to believe I was too much, too emotional, too demanding, too difficult to love. Meeting someone who accepted me without conditions or expectations still felt like a revelation. There's something I've been wondering, Jason said. With everything your mother did, all the ways she hurt you, do you still love her? The question caught me off guard, but I considered it seriously. I love who she could have been, I said finally. I love the mother I needed, but never had. The actual person? I shook my head. I don't think I ever really knew her. She was always hiding behind a facade. Even with her children, especially with her children. How can you love someone you've never truly seen? Jason nodded thoughtfully. And yet you've managed to build all this? He gestured to encompass the evening, the gathering, the new connections, out of that brokenness. That's remarkable. His observation made me consider my journey from a new angle. The past year had been painful, chaotic, and uncertain, but it had also been transformative. I had moved from desperately seeking approval to standing firmly in my own truth, from isolation to genuine connection, from doubt to clarity. The healing wasn't complete, perhaps it never would be entirely. There were still moments when I caught myself falling into old patterns, questioning my worth or doubting my perceptions. But those moments were becoming less frequent, less powerful. I had tools now to recognize and counter them. My therapy with Sarah continued, focusing less on surviving family dynamics and more on building the life I wanted moving forward. Trauma shaped you, she said during one session, but it doesn't have to define you. I had taken those words to heart, making conscious choices about who I wanted to be beyond the identity of family scapegoat. I'd started mentoring young women in marketing, drawing on my own experience to help them navigate professional challenges. I volunteered with a family counseling center, sharing my story when it might help others recognize unhealthy dynamics in their own lives. A week after my dinner gathering, a card arrived in my mailbox. It was handmade, covered in glitter and wobbly letters. Happy Mother's Day to Miss Rebecca. Inside was a crayon drawing of me standing with Zoe, a 10-year-old I mentored through a community program. Thank you for helping me with my math and listening to me. You are like a mother to me. The card caught me completely off guard. I sat on my couch, holding the glittery paper, tears streaming down my face not from pain this time, but from a profound sense of things coming full circle. I had spent my life seeking maternal love and recognition that never came. Now, unexpectedly, I had become a nurturing presence for someone else. The Mother's Day text that had started this journey. We're doing Mother's Day with just the well-behaved kids. You can skip this here. No longer had the power to wound me. My mother had been right about one thing. I didn't belong at that table, performing the role of the problem child in her carefully orchestrated family drama. I belonged here, in this authentic life I was building, surrounded by people who saw and valued the real me. The holiday that had once been a minefield of expectations and inevitable disappointment had been reclaimed and transformed, not through revenge or vindication, but through the harder, braver work of facing truth and choosing a different path forward. As I placed Zoe's card on my mantle, I thought about the many forms family can take, and how the most meaningful connections often come not from biology or obligation, but from choice, the daily decision to see each other clearly, speak truthfully, and stand firmly in our authentic selves, however messy or imperfect those selves might be. That, I realized, was the true liberation my Mother's Day smile had foreshadowed. Not the satisfaction of exposing long-hidden truths, but the freedom to finally, fully become the person I was always meant to be. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to toxic family dynamics or create boundaries with difficult relatives? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. Your story might help someone else who's going through something similar right now. And if you found my journey meaningful, please hit the like button, subscribe to hear more authentic life stories, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Thank you for being part of this community where we can speak our truths without judgment. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't determined by others' recognition of it. It's always been there, waiting for you to claim it.